The night Opal Hennessey held a dying man's hand, she didn't know she was holding the hand of a senator's father. She didn't know because nobody told her. That was how it worked in the memory care unit at Crestwood Gardens. Families checked their people in, filled out the paperwork, listed emergency contacts, and then sometimes they disappeared for weeks at a time. The man in room 14 had been listed under the name Joseph Ardmore. No next of kin on file. Payment came through a private trust. Opal had seen that before. People with money sometimes wanted their fathers tucked away quietly, like something embarrassing. But Joseph himself was not embarrassing. He was 79 years old, and on his good days, he could tell you exactly what the weather had been like in Savannah, Georgia, on June 12, 1968. He remembered the smell of his mother's kitchen. He remembered the name of every dog he'd ever owned. What he couldn't remember was where he was, or why the woman who brought him his oatmeal every morning kept changing her face. Opal had worked the overnight shift at Crestwood for 11 years. She was 51, with reading glasses she kept forgetting on top of her head, and a pair of compression socks she'd bought at Walgreens that she wore every single night because her feet had given up, protesting, and simply started swelling. She had 2 kids. Her son Marcus was finishing his junior year at community college. Her daughter Bree was 15, and in the middle of a phase where she communicated primarily through sighs. Opal's husband, Kevin, had died of a heart attack 6 years ago while he was mowing their backyard on a Tuesday afternoon in July. Afterward, Opal had applied for every extra shift she could get. She was good at her job. Not in the way that gets you written up in newsletters. Not in the way that makes supervisors stop and say your name warmly. She was good in the way that matters at 2 in the morning when someone is frightened and confused and cannot remember where they are. She sat with people. She talked to them about things that mattered to them. She learned what they liked, the music, the TV shows, the specific brand of crackers that tasted like home. For Joseph, it was Patsy Cline, and a particular kind of peppermint candy he'd eaten as a child, the old-fashioned kind in cellophane twist wrappers. Opal had found them at a specialty candy store near her apartment and bought a bag with her own money. He was dying by November. Everyone on the unit could see it. The slow recession. The way he stopped eating. The way his breathing changed in the night. Opal requested to be assigned to his room on those final shifts. Her supervisor, a tired woman named Rhonda who had seen everything, looked at her for a moment and said, "Opal, you can't save them all." "I know," Opal said. "I just don't want him to be alone." So she was there the last 3 nights. She held his hand. She played Patsy Cline on her phone, low, just loud enough. She talked to him about nothing important, about the rain outside, about a funny thing her daughter had said at dinner. She didn't know if he could hear her. She talked anyway. He died on a Thursday morning, just before 4 a.m. The room was very quiet. Outside, a garbage truck was making its rounds 2 streets over. Opal sat with him for a few minutes before she called the nurse's station. She said, quietly, to no one in particular, that she hoped wherever he was now, he remembered everything. What happened next took about 6 weeks to arrive. But when it arrived fast. A man called Crestwood in mid-January asking to speak with whoever was responsible for my father's care in his final weeks. The administrator assumed he meant medically. She transferred him to the unit supervisor. He clarified he meant the person who had been there. Actually there. He'd obtained the shift logs. He had a name. Opal was called into the office on a Thursday afternoon. She thought she was in trouble. She went through her recent shifts, trying to figure out what she'd done. The man on the speakerphone introduced himself as Senator Dale Ardmore of the state of Virginia. His voice was the kind of voice that knew how to fill a room, measured, deliberate, the kind of voice you heard and instinctively straightened up for. He said his father had passed in November. He said he had not been there. He said he was calling because he had been told that one of the overnight staff had been present, had chosen to stay, and he wanted to express his gratitude personally. Opal didn't know what to say. She said, "I just didn't want him to be alone." There was a pause on the line, a long one. "Miss Hennessey," the senator said. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know there's no obligation whatsoever. I'd like to take you to lunch, just to say thank you properly." Opal looked at Rhonda, who was looking at the ceiling. "That's very kind," Opal said carefully, "but that's not necessary." "I know it isn't," he said. "I'd like to anyway." She said she'd think about it. She went home and told Bree, who stared at her and said, "Mom, a senator called you." Opal said yes. Bree said, "Can I tell people?" Opal said absolutely not. She went back and forth for 2 weeks. Something about it made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite name. She hadn't done anything worth a lunch with a senator. She'd done her job. She'd done it because it was the right thing to do, and because Joseph Ardmore had been a human being who deserved not to die in the dark alone. That wasn't extraordinary. That was the minimum. She called and politely declined. Life moved on. February came. Crestwood Gardens went through a round of budget cuts, which was not unusual, and then a second round, which was. By March, Opal got the call she had been dreading since Kevin died. The unit was being restructured. They were eliminating the overnight shift positions and replacing them with a contracted service, and Opal's last day would be April 15th. She had 11 years in that building. She had a plaque on the wall in the break room with her name on it from when she'd hit her decade mark. She trained 3 people who still worked there. On her last day, Rhonda hugged her in the hallway and said, "I'm sorry, Opal. This isn't right." And Opal said, "It's okay," and it wasn't okay. But she said it anyway because she was 51 years old, and she had learned that falling apart in front of people only made things harder for everyone. She filed for unemployment. She applied for positions at 3 other nursing facilities. 2 didn't call back. 1 called her in for an interview and then hired someone younger. She picked up 2 shifts a week doing home health aide work through an agency, which paid badly, and required her to drive to neighborhoods far from hers in a car that was making a noise she didn't want to pay attention to. She sold the bedroom furniture from the room she'd been using as a home office. She cut her phone plan down to the minimum. Marcus knew. He offered to drop out of school and get a full-time job, and Opal told him if he did that she would never forgive him, and she said it with exactly enough force that he believed her. Bree didn't know the full picture. Bree thought things were tight. Bree didn't know Opal was sometimes choosing between a copay and a grocery run. In June, the home health aid agency lost 2 of their contracts and cut her shifts to 1 a week. It was Bree who said it. They were at the kitchen table, and Bree was doing homework. And Opal was looking at a spreadsheet she'd made on a piece of notebook paper because the math looked less frightening when it wasn't on a screen. Bree said, without looking up, "Aunt Cheryl said there's a woman on her street who sells plants out of her yard and makes decent money." Opal looked at her. "You like plants," Bree said. She did like plants. Their apartment had 17 of them. The back patio had 4 more in terracotta pots that Opal had been tending for years, including a rosemary bush that had survived 3 winters and showed no signs of stopping. It wasn't plants, exactly, that Opal landed on. It was cut flowers and small potted herbs, sourced from a wholesale market she drove to at 5 in the morning twice a week. She got a folding table and a shade canopy, and she set up on Saturday and Sunday mornings at the farmer's market on Oleander Street, which had an open vendor policy, as long as you showed up by 7 and paid the $12 daily fee. The first Saturday, she made $43. She sat in her car after and cried, not from sadness exactly, but from something more complicated. The specific exhaustion of being a person who has done everything right and still ended up somewhere they never expected to be. The second Saturday was better. People came back. A woman named Just a Neighbor, someone who bought lavender bundles, started stopping by every week and sometimes brought her daughter. Opal learned what sold and what didn't. Small herb pots moved fast. Peonies moved fast. Carnations didn't move at all, which surprised her because she liked carnations. She stopped bringing carnations. She started to know the market regulars. The man who bought bread from the stall next to hers and always offered to watch her table if she needed to use the restroom. The teenager who ran the honey booth and was saving for a trip to see his grandmother in Ecuador. These were her people now. This was the thing she did on Saturdays and Sundays instead of sleeping after a night shift. She was fine, not good, but fine. There's a whole life lived in that distinction. It was a Sunday in August when she noticed the man. He'd walked through the market twice. She'd registered him the second time, the way you register something that doesn't quite fit. He was wearing slacks and a jacket on a Sunday morning in August, which in itself was a statement. He was looking at the stalls, but not in the way people looked when they wanted to buy something. He was looking like someone searching. The third time he came around, he stopped in front of her table. He looked at the dahlias she had in a white bucket. He looked at the small pots of basil and thyme. He looked at her. "How much for the peonies?" he asked. $8 a bunch, Opal said. He nodded slowly. He didn't reach for his wallet. She recognized him at the same moment he recognized her. It landed like stepping off a curb you didn't see coming. The small shock, the reorientation. Senator Dale Ardmore looked older than he'd sounded on the phone. He had his father's eyes, she realized. She hadn't known that before, had only known the voice, but now she could see it clearly. The same particular gray, the same steadiness in them. He said quietly, "Miss Hennessey." Bree was behind her, crouched over a cardboard box, unpacking the last of the potted herbs. She went still. "Senator," Opal said. He stood there for a moment. He seemed to be gathering something, not courage exactly. Something more like the right words for a thing there weren't quite right words for. "Mama," Bree said, and her voice had that particular 16-year-old note that meant she was trying to sound casual and completely failing. "Do you know this man?" "Yes," Opal said. "This is Senator Ardmore. I worked with his father." Dale Ardmore looked at Bree. He looked back at Opal. "I've been trying to reach you," he said. "Your number is no longer in service." "I changed carriers," Opal said. She kept her voice even. He was quiet for a moment. He bought the peonies. He handed her a 20 and told her to keep the change, and she handed him $12 back and told him she'd prefer not to, and he looked at her with something that might have been the closest thing he'd ever felt to being corrected and didn't know what to do with. "Could I?" He started. "I just want to talk. Please." "I'm working," Opal said. "I know." He looked at the table. The canopy, the $12 daily fee she was paying to stand in August heat to sell flowers. "I know you are. I can see that." There was a long pause between them. The honey booth teenager was pretending to arrange jars. The bread man was very intently not looking over. "There's a coffee cart around the corner," she said finally. "Bree can watch the table for 20 minutes. Bree straightened up immediately with the energy of someone who had been hoping to be asked. They stood at a small table outside the coffee cart, and Dale Ardmore, United States Senator, told her that he had not been there when his father died because he and his father had not spoken in 4 years, and that he had spent the last 9 months trying to figure out what to do with that, and that somehow, irrationally, he knew, knowing that someone had been there, had actually been present, had made it feel less like something that could not be undone. Opal listened. "I should have been there," he said. "I can't go back and change that." "No," she agreed. "You can't." He looked at her. "I want to help you. Whatever you need. I don't mean this to sound the way rich people make it sound when they say it. I mean it genuinely." "I know you do," she said. "And I appreciate that more than I can tell you. But I'm not looking for a benefactor." "What are you looking for?" She thought about it. Honestly thought about it, which she hadn't expected to do. "I'm looking to get back to work," she said. "Real work. I spent 11 years caring for people who needed it, and I'm good at it, and I lost that job through no fault of my own, and I'm 51 years old, and nobody wants to hire a 51-year-old woman for a position she's overqualified for on paper and undercredentialed for by their standards." She paused. "I'm not asking you to fix that. I'm just telling you what's true." He was quiet for a moment. "What would you do?" he said. "If the job was there?" She didn't hesitate. "I'd go back to memory care. That's where I'm best. Those are my people." He nodded. He was quiet for a long time. He looked down at the peonies in his hand. "My father used to say," Dale said slowly, "that the only debts that matter are the ones you can't put a number on." Opal picked up her coffee. He was a smart man, she said. She went back to her table. Bree had sold 3 herb pots and a bunch of sunflowers and was extremely pleased with herself. The bread man gave Opal a small nod when she passed. She set up the rest of the dahlias and tried not to think too hard about the conversation she'd just had. 3 weeks later, she got a call from a woman named Dr. Susan Farwell, who was the executive director of a nonprofit called the Ardmore Memory Care Initiative, which had been founded 8 months ago in memory of Joseph Ardmore. They were in the process of opening their first residential facility in the city. 15 beds, staff-to-resident ratio of 1:3, full medical partnership with a regional hospital system. They were looking for a head of resident care. The position required nursing certification, which Opal had. It required experience in memory care, which Opal had. It paid a salary that made Opal sit down. "How did you get my name?" Opal asked. Dr. Farwell paused. "I was told you were someone who understood what this work is actually for." Opal was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Of course. Is this a real position? I mean, is this something that exists regardless of me, or is this something that was created because of me?" Dr. Farwell didn't answer right away. When she did, she said, "The initiative is real. The need is real. There are 15 people who are going to need exactly the kind of care you provided for 11 years, and we need someone to build the culture of this place from the ground up. That is a real job that we need a real person to do." A pause. "The fact that the right person turned out to be you. I think that's just how things sometimes work out." Opal asked for 2 days to think about it. She told Marcus that night. He sat at the kitchen table and said nothing for a long moment and then said, "Mom, take the job." She said she was thinking about the ethics of it. He said, "Mom, take the job." Bree said from the hallway, where she had clearly been listening for the last 10 minutes, "Mama, if you don't take that job, I am going to be so upset with you." Opal laughed. She hadn't laughed like that in a while. The involuntary kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere below your sternum. She called Dr. Farwell the next morning. She started in October. The facility was still in its final construction phase when she came on, which meant her first 2 months were paperwork and hiring and the particular kind of exhausting work that goes into building a thing from nothing. She hired carefully. She hired the way she'd always worked, looking for the people who understood that this wasn't a job where you clocked out emotionally, that the people in those rooms were somebody's father, somebody's mother, somebody's whole world, and they deserved someone in the room who knew that. On the day the facility opened, she walked through the 15 rooms with Dr. Farwell and made sure each one had something. A small plant, a piece of art on the wall, something that made it feel less like a room and more like a place a person might actually live. She stopped at room 7, which had a window that caught the morning light in a particular way, and stood there for a minute. She thought about Joseph. Patsy Cline at 4 in the morning, the way a person's breathing changes when they are leaving. She thought about the fact that she had done the right thing on a night when it would have been easy not to. On a night when there was no audience and no reward, and nothing waiting on the other side of it except the knowledge that a man hadn't died alone. She had not done it to be found. She had not done it to be saved. She had done it because she was Opal Hennessey, and that was what she did. She showed up, she stayed, and she did not look away from the hard parts. All the rest of it had simply followed from that. There are 6.5 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease or related dementias. Most of them will spend part of their illness in a care facility. Most of them will be cared for, at some point, by someone working an overnight shift for not enough money. Someone who chose this work because they understood that dignity doesn't stop mattering when the memory does. Most of those people will never be found at a farmer's market by a senator. Most of them will just keep showing up. This is for them too.